Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through one of my most anticipated fantasy releases of this year. I would also like for this to be the beginning of what is essentially like a new video series. Obviously it's not the most creative or different or unique, just going through books that I'm highly anticipating and relaying to you my thoughts on them, but I do find that now that my time is a little bit divided and I am having to read a lot of other things for the other work that I do, it means that my reading of new releases has taken a bit of a backseat. So kind of as a way to motivate myself, but then also still get to share my thoughts about all of these, I wanted to try and have dedicated videos for some of my most anticipated releases. What tends to be considered one of my most anticipated releases, either it's a sequel, it's a book by an author whose works I really enjoy or at the very least am very curious about, or it's just a book that I think sounds great and I really, really want to make time for it. Today we are going to be talking about a sequel. I will ensure that there aren't any spoilers for the series overall, and I will talk a little bit about the first book in the series so that way you have a little bit of an idea, the synopsis, the characters, all those sorts of things, and you can decide for yourself if you think it sounds good. If you do end up wanting to talk spoilers, you are welcome to write spoilers and then enter so that nobody has anything ruined for them. But I also thought this could be a fun way to have a little bit of a vlog, have this be a little bit chatty. It's not like a formal review, it's just sort of, here are my thoughts about this story. And when I say kind of sort of a vlog, I mean share clips with my dog. Oh, and speaking of keeping things casual and also animals, I know I am slowly becoming an elderly person, and this is because I almost every single day tell my husband about the walks I go on, even though it's pretty much the same walks every single day. And on those walks, I look for birds. And I know that's not interesting or exciting, but I still feel like sharing. So I'm going to talk about birds for a second. And if you don't care about birds, I'll have a timestamp and you can skip ahead. But because we're keeping things casual, I want to talk about the birds. So I discovered not so long ago, actually that's not true, quite a while back, there is a park near where I live, and I quite like this park, and in walking around it, I was like, oh my gosh, look at that bird, it's so cute and it's so pretty. And the bird was a vermilion flycatcher. They're very beautiful. They kind of have this bright red-orange color to them, and that's specific to the boys. The girls are slightly different colored, but equally adorable, and there are a few that tend to hang out around certain areas on this path in this park, and I have named them. I will share some footage of the vermilion flycatchers, but recently, and sadly I don't have footage of this, there has been an owl in my neighborhood, which is not interesting for those of you who live places where owls are frequent, but it's kind of cool in Arizona. And our owls, not all of them, because there's the burrowing owls, those are different, but the ones that tend to, keep to the skies and fly around, they're really big here. The owls can be really big and they freak my husband out. He gets scared of them because he's like, they're so quiet and they just stare. And I, unfortunately, don't have good footage of it. My husband got a pretty good picture of one of them. And then the thing that I think is really interesting is that there's a lot of mockingbirds in my neighborhood and just around. And there was one year, last year I think, where they had a little baby one that was just in my rose bushes. And I discovered it because it kept squeaking. I was in my house and I just kept hearing the squeak and I was like, what is that? And then I went outside. Actually, I didn't go outside. I looked out the window to see if I could see, and it was in the bush in front of the window, and it was just like looking right in that spot. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's so cute. And it just looked so upset. I have found the mockingbirds to be pretty entertaining, and they sing lots of really interesting songs. But the mockingbirds are vicious in a way that I kind of am fascinated by. So we have recently had some red-tailed hawks in our neighborhood as well. They're massive, and they tend to keep to these palm trees. And there's a couple of them. They have a really distinct call where it sounds like something is dying. It's really, I'm not going to try to do it. I was going to try to do it. And I'm like, no, I'm already embarrassing myself talking about birds, so I'm not going to make their noises too. You can look up what they sound like. That's the only reason I knew what kind of hawk it was. They come in a lot of different colors, and I was like, what is that? And the ones in our neighborhood are really dark. So anyway, there have been a couple, and sometimes they caw at each other. And then I was watching, because I was trying to get a better look at them, because they're really cool. And then the little birds, mainly the mockingbirds, are attacking it. And they were kind of ramming into it. And I was like, what is happening? And I watched for a while. My husband and I are both like, what? And I guess it makes sense if the hawks are a threat to their babies or they're territorial or something like that. You're like, I mean, I guess that makes sense. I've just never seen it before. And then recently the other day, it was really, I mean, I don't want to say it was really cool, but from an angle of just like observing nature, it was interesting. But the hawk, it got tired of it and it flew. And then the other birds flew alongside and were hitting it as it was flying away. And I was like, oh my gosh. So anyway, I'm going to share, besides just clips of Luna, I'll share some bird footage. Oh, I can't believe I forgot. We also have lovebirds here. So I guess lovebirds are not necessarily native to Arizona or Hawaii, which is where, as far as in the US goes, you will see them. They are actually not even on this continent. They're in the continent of Africa, but because so many people had them as pets, some of the ones that escaped ended up having babies and then just kind of have made themselves part of the environment. So we actually have just wild lovebirds. Rosy, I think, what do they call them? Rosy-cheeked lovebirds when you use the Merlin app. And they are so cute. And they are almost always together. They're very cute. And, anyway, let me know about the birds in the areas you live in. All that said, let's talk about some books now. So the book that we're going to be talking about today would be To Ride a Rising Storm. The first book in the series is To Shape a Dragon's Breath. We'll segue to animal content. We'll talk about To Shape a Dragon's Breath, more animal content, and then we'll talk about To Ride a Rising Storm. I do have an in-depth review for the first book if you are interested, but a quick summary. You follow this young woman named Anakus, this teenage girl, I should say, and within the story at the beginning, she bonds to a baby dragon. The story is not hiding whatsoever that it is alternate history. If you are not necessarily super familiar with the difference between historical fantasy versus alternate history, there usually is some kind of key factor that makes things change within civilization, but a lot of the rest of it stays pretty similar, and it tends to be focused in on a specific time or place. The thing that comes to mind for a lot of people is Naomi Novik's Temeraire series, which is Napoleonic era, but with dragons, as almost like the Air Force. So similarly, we're looking at the 1800s in this story, but with dragons, and you are looking at a member of an indigenous group of peoples who is forced to go to this school, because within the schools is where they teach young people how to bond, quote unquote, properly with their dragons. And you can kind of pick up on likely some of the thematic pieces within the story, as you do find this young indigenous girl is being almost forced to assimilate, and if she doesn't do as the authorities tell her, she will have her dragon taken away from her. The dragon might even possibly be killed, and they are not pleased to find that somebody of her birth and from her culture ends up having this opportunity. There are some people, some adults, that are rooting for her. There are some that clearly take issue with this, and a lot of the ways in which the adults are acting around her is almost very clearly rooted in how people were actually treated at that time and have been treated across time and place. I really felt the author took so much care when it came to portraying not only Anakus and her culture, but many of the other cultures. There's this really unique, cool component to the story where randomly a character will kind of tell you a story, and that story and how it's told is often rooted in their own mythology and their own culture. So you have some that feel more Viking inspired, more Norse inspired, and then you have some that are more rooted from other places, and you'll see all the various different versions of this if you do pick up the book. I really liked that. It kind of shows the melting pot that is this time and place, to use that phrase again, and also to just kind of understand the characters. I also felt like the characters behaved very realistically. Some of the characters are awful and villainous in a way that if you take any time to learn about history, you realize that's exactly how some people are and were. And then you have other characters that you kind of are like, oh man, I wish you wouldn't act the way you act, but like I understand why you do, and I understand why you have the priorities you have, and I understand how the environment has impacted you, but also you just kind of want to shake them. But I really respected that the author didn't try to sugarcoat anything, and she wrote the characters in a way that feels very, very, very realistic, and also contributes to the struggle that Anakus has, and that constant push and pull between having to do as others say, and basically being forced to assimilate, but also trying to hold true to the things that matter to her, and also to try and impact them. They kind of think all we're going to be able to do is try to force you into this rigid box, and she kind of in her own way, just by existing, can have the potential to impact people in return. And there are a lot of great moments over the course of the story where you are seeing that kind of model version of who she is. In this particular case, they expect her to, some people anyway, they root for her, they want her to succeed, but they also put all this pressure on her, even though she never asked for pretty much any of this. They put all this pressure on her to try and show, like, look how your people could be. I need you to show everyone else so you can prove them wrong. And it's just such an unfair burden to have placed on her, and also it's extremely dehumanizing to be even thought of as that way, as if the only way to be seen as a person is if you adhere to random made-up social codes, basically. And it tackled all this really, really well. The world building was really cool. The magic was really cool. I thought that the characters were very well written. Really loved that first book. It was one of my favorite books that I picked up last year. Bear, you'll get fed. I promise. I feed you at the same time every day. Every day. You pout. Sometimes 45 minutes before you're fed. Now segueing into my thoughts on book 2, To Ride a Rising Storm. I was so excited for the sequel, and it was one of those books that I thought there is definitely no way I'm not going to be picking this up this year, because I loved the first book so much. I cannot wait to see what happens, and also I just want to make sure that I have basically nothing else going on and I can just totally devote myself to getting sucked into this book and being reacquainted with everyone and everything about it. And the first chunk of the book, it was slower moving, and it was a lot of build-up, and we're kind of getting introduced to some new characters. Some plot lines are clearly starting to form that are going to have some kind of payoff, or are going to dismantle some other things or cause problems for other things. And you can see, okay, it's a lot of building, and I'm excited about this because oh, I can only imagine what the second half is going to be like, or what the last third of the book is going to be like. As we kept going through the story, and as we're approaching the, I would say, end of the first half, I thought, okay, we've gotten a lot of good conversations, we've gotten a lot of really interesting setup, we've kind of pulled us out of book 1, and we're getting ourselves ready for whatever's going to happen in this last chunk. And then, you know, you make it like 60%, 65%, 70%, 75%. And I was like, okay, surely this last quarter, things are going to happen. We're having a lot of conversations, but I'm sure that now that we have all this weight and all these stakes, and we care about these characters, and we care about the relationship building, and we have reacclimated ourselves, okay, this last quarter, the things are finally gonna kick off. And then it was kind of like the last chapter where things started to pick up. And I don't want to say randomly, because there were clear indications from the beginning of things we're gonna build. And I don't mind that things were building to the next book, but I just wish more had happened in the meantime. In a recent video, my mid-year wrap-up, I talked about how I'm all for having a lot of conversations in books. I don't mean to say that if there's no action scenes, then what's even the point or anything like that. But the conversations, sometimes we had kind of like the same conversation multiple times, or a version of a conversation we'd had before, or a version of an interaction also that we'd had before. It kind of started to feel repetitive to a point where I'm like, didn't we already kind of do this? And then we kept doing that with different characters. It was like we had a certain conversation, and then you're like, okay, there's a lot of characters also, and there's a lot of different thematic elements that you see represented through different characters. So we'd have, let's say you have 4, and you're seeing these interactions, and you're like, okay, well, now that we've had these things, I expect it to build from here. But it was almost like we would kind of repeat similar things. And I just really, the way I put it before is that I'm a little concerned for the state of this story because of how repetitive a lot of the second book was. And I think the term, I know this gets thrown around all the time, the term middle book syndrome, but I think that is applicable here. Returning to what I was saying before, though, about how conversations can be good, is that I still expect there to be like some level of tension or something really wholesome, or something that reveals things to you that builds curiosity and intrigue. I expect that within conversations. And it's not to say that this didn't have any of it. It just, we started to kind of have the wind out of our sails because of the fact that they would feel somewhat repetitive. And I was ultimately a little bummed by this. And when I say I'm concerned, is that if the story ends up being at least a quartet, then I can be understanding of a lot of what transpired within this book, because I can get behind slower pace, even though I think I still think we could have pushed things along a little bit more in this book, but I can get behind that if we're really truly building. But if we have one book left, if it ends up just being a trilogy, there have been a lot of things foreshadowed and a lot of things hinted at in the first 2 books that I just don't see wrapping up in any kind of satisfying way within one additional book, unless that one additional book is really long. But there's just so much that I feel like needs to happen. And if it ends up being 4 books, I could see a lot happening in books 3 and 4 that does result in being a really satisfying story, and book 2 is just one of those like, oh, that was kind of a build-up book. And I could get behind that. And also, better to have the middle be a little bit of a slog than the third, right? You never want to have 2 amazing books and then a third book that just falls flat. So I can get behind the build-up. But I just don't know what book 3 is going to look like. And I don't know if book 3 is going to be the final book. And I really hope it's not, because I loved book 1, and I love this character, and I love so much of what the author has done within the story. And I really think it could be amazing. I think the series could be amazing, but I really hope it's 2. It's not like if it's only 1 more book, I'm not going to finish the trilogy or something. I'm still very curious, but juxtaposing this to another story that is not necessarily entirely similar, but there's some parallels. The Aurelian Cycle. The first book in that trilogy, I thought, I really liked this book. I really liked the characters. And there is kind of a school setting within that one too. And there's this question about outsiders coming into the picture and possibly disrupting their society. There's also a question of resistance and unrest. So they have those things in common. And you really grow to like the characters within the first book. You understand the stakes. The second book in that trilogy, it just built in every way you could imagine. You also expanded the perspectives. And that's a tough thing to balance, is introducing new characters or getting more of characters from before, and also furthering the plots of the characters you fell in love with in the first book, or at the very least you were introduced to in the first book. And on top of that, the plot was just absolutely amazing and was delivering on every level. It was a feat. Book 2 was amazing. So I know that you can do it. I think that book is just kind of an unfair thing to hold other second books to, because that one was so well executed. And I know that is not the norm. A lot of second books do have to pull you out of the first one and then push you into the third one, and I do think that's what happened here. I just hope we get more time. But on that note, if you have read it, I'm curious your thoughts on it, and if you've only read the first book, I hope I haven't deterred you from continuing on with the series or anything. If anything, maybe you will go in and you will end up liking book 2 even more, because you're not expecting it to be anything too intense or anything like that. And then also, let me know your thoughts on birds, or just animals, or what's a random thing that you've recently gotten into. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.